Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
A diesel-powered engine on a farm works hard and operates in a grueling environment. Soy biodiesel fuels stand up to the challenge of powering farm equipment, but are also renewable and environmentally responsible as well. The Nebraska Soybean Board is committed to encouraging the use of soy biodiesel to protect the environment and sustain Nebraska's agriculture. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Jim Robb describes high profit margins in the cattle industry. Loren Giesler explains how to scout fields for soybean diseases. Jerry Volesky talks about pasture conditions in the Sandhills, and Brad Lubin discusses decisions between ARC and PLC programs under the 2014 Farm Bill. Jim Robb from the Livestock Marketing Information Center is our cattle market analyst this week. The USDA Tuesday released meat price data for the month of July, showing a new high for all fresh retail beef at nearly $5.56 per pound. The cost is 5 cents above June and 60 cents per pound more expensive than July 2013. As we've mentioned, large crops of corn and soybeans are making for cheaper feeder diets, but those animals coming into the feedlots are, to say the least, expensive. We talked with Jim at the Goodmanson Sandhills Lab Open House Wednesday near Whitman and began by asking him to characterize the current feedlot profit margins.
Feedlot margins on the closeouts, especially in July, were excellent. We had the best margins that we had in any month in our estimates since November 2003. So we've had 6 to 8 months of excellent feedlot margins. But as we look ahead here, those margins are certainly going to deteriorate with our lower fed cattle market and super high feeder cattle costs.
That's right. What we're seeing out here in this area of the state, compare what these producers will see for their returns, cow-calf producers that is.
Cow-calf, these are unprecedented returns that we'll post here in 2014. Producers are actually going to have tax problems that are significant. We have record high calf prices, $100 a hundredweight over a year ago. We have costs of production that have moderated a little bit, and we've had a very good grass year. So for cow-calf operations, we're looking at the highest margins. LMIC has been calculating margins since the early 1970s. And even if we adjust for inflation, we've really never seen anything like this.
Do you expect prices in both of those sectors to continue to rise?
Most of the run-up in prices, dramatic here in 2014, is behind us. But on an annual average basis, we can certainly have a situation where fed cattle and feeder cattle and calf prices continue to rise a little bit in 2015, maybe again in 2016. But somewhere in the next few years, we probably have an annual top in the market that is on the horizon.
And so far, consumers have been supportive of this move.
It's been one of the real reasons we've had a very strong market has been the demand side of the economic marketplace. And the consumers, both domestically and foreign, have been surprisingly strong in their fundamental demand for beef, especially in the second quarter of 2014. And it's also been in the other red meats. Their demand for all the red meats has been very strong. So this has been a very strong consumer profile. Probably indicates that the U.S. economy is a little bit stronger than it appears on the surface, but also the quality of the beef product still remains very attractive.
You said today that for the domestic buyer, you think that those that will leave have already left.
In economics, we have a demand relationship, and price and quantity, but consumers really don't buy a little bit less beef. Many of them move away from a category as prices go higher, and many of those consumers that were sort of marginal beef eaters and are very price sensitive have already sort of left the beef profile. Certainly the ones that remain have the income potential and have really shown that they're willing to spend higher prices that really more than compensate for the quantity declining in the overall market sense.
You touched on this, but describe the foreign buyers for beef right now.
Foreign buyers have been surprisingly strong. They tend to be much more price sensitive than U.S. consumers are. in most foreign markets. And the quantity of beef that we now export on a tonnage basis for this year should be above a year ago. The dollar value of our beef exports will be record large. So that foreign demand component has really been one of the real surprises in this marketplace. We thought with our record high beef prices, we'd see some more dampening in the beef demand profile. That really hasn't occurred.
Do I understand correctly that you believe the neighbors in North America, specifically Mexico, will be more important than maybe gaining a market share, a bigger market share in China?
I think we look over the next 3 to 5 years, the border countries to the U.S. and especially Mexico will be the real leaders on our export demand profile in the beef complex and the meat complex overall. As we ramp up pork and chicken production in the U.S., we'll see very strong markets in Mexico, which will help absorb those supplies. So I think really looking closer to home in some cases will be one of the keys. We've seen recently that the Russia and China continue to ban U.S. beef products. Those are probably things that are a long-term fix. But in the next 3 to 5 years, I think put your money on the North American markets, especially from a beef industry perspective.
How much competition is beef seeing right now from either pork or chicken?
Surprisingly little. We've had real disease problems in the U.S. hog industry. Chicken industry's had some real struggles in building their breeder supply flock. So the first half of 2014, it's really been a supportive factor for beef prices. Consumers have not seen the real rollback in pork and chicken prices at the meat case, for example. We look ahead to late 2015, 2016, we're going to see more competition ahead coming from the U.S. pork and poultry sectors. It's going to be a little bit of a headwind to how fast beef prices and cattle prices can increase.
As we've mentioned here, these producers in this area of the state will see very decent profits this year. What are some options that they should be looking for to what to do with that money?
We really need to start planning now. We need to make some initial estimates of what our incomes are going to be this year, look at the tax implication, visit with a tax advisor, and then really look at these management options on their ranch and how to make sound investments that are going to pay off in the long term. Sort of an unprecedented set of returns in cow-calf country probably mean we need to manage earlier, and we're really going to have to manage the tax implications much more than we probably ever have had to in cow-calf country.
Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will join us to analyze corn, soybean, and wheat markets. For more than a year, the porcine epidemic diarrhea virus has ravaged hog herds across the United States. While the pig industry knew the virus could move rapidly, it didn't know all the ways it could travel. That's now changed. Researchers from Pipestone Veterinary Services in Minnesota, along with researchers from South Dakota State University, announced this week they've been able to confirm the spread of porcine epidemic diarrhea virus through contaminated feed. 30 states have now recorded a positive PEDV test. The most recent data for the first week of August shows the lowest number of positives since mid-October. Nebraska farmers are expected to produce more than 278 million bushels of soybeans during the 2014 harvest. That total production is estimated to be the 5th highest in the nation after Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, and Indiana. In the latest USDA state report, 70% of Nebraska's crop was rated good to excellent, with 89% listed as setting pods. However, some problems are now arising in fields across the state. UNL Extension plant pathologist Loren Giesler talked with us at a Nebraska Soybean Board-sponsored field day in Auburn last week and said soybean diseases could be causing problems for growers.
We're really in the heat of the stem and root rot season this time of year, and a lot of things going on right now where we see sudden death syndrome, phytopthora stem and root rot in some of those fields that had some heavy rains. We're getting white mold in the northern portion of the state, so brown stem rot also. So a lot out there right now, and now's the real key time to scout those fields and identify them correctly for future management.
Walk me through sudden death syndrome. Where's it at and what should you look for?
Well, all of those are generally going to be pocketed diseases in the field. So SDS, well, a lot of times we'll see that interveinal chlorosis and chlorotic areas in the leaves, usually in the upper portion of the canopy. Those leaves, then that area becomes brown and necrotic, and then those leaves will drop off, and actually that leaf stem or petiole will stay attached. So that'll happen over the course of just a couple weeks many times, and again in pockets. Now the key with that is, though, that can look a lot like brown stem rot. So the foliar symptoms look similar, but that stem injury will look different. So if you pull those plants, SDS plants will usually pull pretty easy. Their taproots often are rotted off. And then the other thing is take that stem and just take a knife and split it. And if you see brown inside the center of the stem, then you're dealing with brown stem rot versus SDS, which again can look the same from above ground.
SDS, is that long-term then?
Both of these are. Now, another key difference though, variety selection, both of those are going to be key for management. But SDS, isn't affected by rotation and brown stem rot is. So things like that are quite different. So that's why it's so important now to get them identified correctly.
Any treatment for brown stem rot?
Same thing, going to be variety selection primarily. That's your biggest thing. So with both of those, seed treatment's not going to be effective for either of them next, when you're doing that seed order. But again, that variety selection. So just make sure you get them identified.
You mentioned white mold. Where are we seeing that at in Nebraska?
Well, white mold, this year we had really cool, wet conditions at flowering. And that is critical. And we had a cool week during the Soybean Management Field Day Series. And so again, those cool temperatures are really conducive for that. Now, the good news is, if you don't see white mold in your field, you don't have to worry about it. We're getting a lot of reports from the northern portion of the state, northern half. It could show up, really pretty much in the eastern half of the state, I think, from the weather pattern we had depending on when flowering and that cool temperature worked. Now, we won't see a lot of spread just locally from those points of infection now. So most of the time when we look at management on that, we were looking at foliar fungicide applications early during the blooming stages. So growers that had a history of white mold, hopefully maybe they did some spraying then. Once we get past that, we just see local spread from stem to stem within that canopy. So a lot of times not a good practice to use a fungicide at that point.
If you know you've had it, or if you have it this year, should you do something differently in 2 years in terms of row spacing or anything like that?
Well, row spacing we know has an effect. So narrow rows increases white mold. The problem with white mold in Nebraska is it's normally a problem maybe 1 in 7 to 10 years. We've just had 2 years in a row where we've had cooler climate and where we've had this. So if I had to guess, I would guess the next time it's in beans this won't happen. But every time I've made a guess, I'm usually wrong. So
well, maybe this will be the lucky time, right?
But anyway, variety selection is key on that first. That's going to be your number one. And then go on, if you've got a real strong history of it, then you might look at making that fungicide application earlier in that flowering stage.
And finally, phytophthora, walk me through it.
Phytophthora stem and root rot, pretty easy to identify. Dark discoloration at the base of that plant working its way up. From the outside, you can see that dark discoloration going to be in pockets. This time of year, any of our irrigated producers, if you're looking in wheel tracks, a great place to scout for it. You'll see individual dead plants. If you see dead plants in the field or in wet spots, you probably have some injury in other places in the field. So using that resistant variety is number one, and then the next step is going to be to make sure you got a good seed treatment package on there that's going to have Phytophthora control.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more information from UNL on identifying and managing these diseases. The 2014 Nebraska State Fair is now open in Grand Island. If you attend, you'll have the opportunity to tour the Raising Nebraska exhibit, a large display designed to help visitors better understand all facets of agriculture in this state. Chuck Hibberd, the Dean and Director of Extension at UNL, explains what fairgoers will be able to see.
We're so excited. 25,000 square feet in the new Nebraska building, dedicated to Nebraska agriculture. And what's really cool about it, we talked to a lot of the commodity group folks, producers, UNL ag folks to get the content. The content is focused on consumers and what consumers want to know about Nebraska agriculture. And so we've created this whole experience around the big questions that consumers have. When they come into the experience, they get to do a lot of different things. There's a combine ride, for example, where a 3-sided video, it's just like riding on a combine, harvesting corn. They get to see a real center pivot in operation. They get to walk on a map. It's a walkable map of Nebraska, 50 feet long. When you step on a county, it'll tell you what crops are grown in that county, how much irrigation they apply, all those kinds of things. And a movie theater in a grain bin. That's a really exciting place where people can learn about Nebraska agriculture. So we're excited to open Friday at the State Fair.
The display is a collaborative effort between UNL's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, the Nebraska Department of Ag, and the Nebraska State Fair. It was also supported by multiple industry and commodity groups. For more details, you can visit raisingnebraska.net. The Nebraska State Fair runs through September 1st. However, the exhibit is scheduled to be open year-round. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we traveled this week to the 15th annual Goodmanson Sandhills Lab Open House near Whitman. It's an area of the state where cow-calf production is prominent and dependent on Mother Nature to provide enough rain for grasses. In our interview with UNL Extension Range and Forage Specialist Jerry Volesky, you'll be able to notice the distinction between rough years like 2012 and better years like this one.
Well, here in 2014, most of the Sandhills areas do look pretty good. Some areas had a little bit dry April and even into parts of May, so there was some concern back earlier on in the spring, but When June rolled around, a lot of rain occurred, pretty widespread rain, and well above average. And I've always said that the rainfall in April and May can really make the difference in terms of the Sandhills pasture and grass production. So it's been quite good.
Have they been that much better than the past few years?
Well, yes. Of course, 2 years ago in 2012, we had that extreme drought and things were really tough. But I think something that caught people off guard was last year in 2013, where here, for example, at the Goodmanson or this part of the Sandhills, we had average rainfall, but still just the impact of that drought in 2012, it really thinned out the grasses, a lot of grass death loss. And so a year ago, even with the rainfall that we did have, the pasture production was about half of normal.
But those stands are now filling back out?
Right. It was a good year in terms of the drought recovery. It took basically a full year of a good growing season for the grass recovery from the drought. And then so as we're here in 2014, it's pretty well on its way back, particularly pasture that wasn't abused or pasture that wasn't in fair to good or excellent condition. That's well on its way to full drought recovery.
How has hay production been?
Hay production has been really good this year as well. Here at the Goodmanson, I think we're slightly above our long-term average in terms of the tons per acre that were harvested off of the sub-irrigated meadows. And again, very similar to the previous 2 years, or I should say, the hay production the previous 2 years wasn't that good either, both because of the drought in 12, and then in 13, a year ago, we had such a cold, late, wet spring, and that really affected the cool season hay production.
Do we notice less sunflowers out this year?
Oh, absolutely. Throughout the Sandhills in 2013, there was just a tremendous amount of sunflowers. Here in August, hills would be completely yellow. Also, a lot of other annual weeds like lamb quarters, Texas croton, number of species. But all that was just a one-time response to the drought of 2012. And as the grasses improved and thickened up this year, the annual weeds like the sunflowers just aren't there.
Anything producers need to be doing now to get ready for the rest of the growing season?
Well, I think in terms of their grazing plans and grazing programs, we're winding down, I guess, with just really more of a couple more months left in the growing season. But I just encourage them to watch their stocking rates on their individual pastures, keeping records of how things look this year in each of their pastures, and use that information in terms of planning for next year and the subsequent year.
Next week, we'll talk with UNL Extension educator Aaron Berger about marketing this year's calf crop. In last week's episode of Market Journal, we talked with Nebraska State Farm Service Agency Executive Director Dan Steinkruger about livestock emergency programs and implementation of price loss coverage and agricultural risk coverage programs. This week, UNL Extension Public Policy Specialist Brad Lubin is with us to discuss 3 decisions growers will need to be making. We talked with Brad at a Nebraska Soybean Board-sponsored field day in Auburn last week and began by looking at updates to base acres and yield.
That will be their first decision to come out, perhaps by late September, or certainly into October. Producers have a existing program base acreage and a program payment yield for farm program purposes. This new farm bill gives them a one-time chance to update them both. They're separate decisions. Producers can update yield to 90% of the average yield that they had from 2008 to 2012. There's every reason for producers to want to do this.
Because?
It only matters technically for the price loss coverage program, but this is the first time we've had a chance to update yields since 2002, and it may be the last time we have a chance to update yields until many, many years past this farm bill. You get a chance, you better do it.
And presumably the technology has maybe increased those yields.
For almost everybody, one would expect that the current update would beat their existing payment yields, some of which have actually been frozen since 1985.
With
the base acreage as well, that's not an obvious choice, but for many producers, updating base acreage, reallocating it amongst their current crop mix would be a stronger choice than what they are currently living with again back from 2002 or before.
With this new Farm Bill, we also have new commodity programs, ARC and PLC, as you mentioned.
Right.
How are we on deciding when those get implemented?
You know, while the base and yield decision may roll out here yet in late September into early October, the ARC versus PLC decision likely doesn't happen until very late this year or even into early 2015. It's the basic choice of a revenue safety net versus a price safety net. It's complicated with some crop by crop, farm by farm decisions and the individual ARC decision, but producers also have time to study this, and we'll have decision tools and education programs in the meantime that certainly are going to be valuable.
Now, the decision between ARC and PLC, that's a one-time decision that lasts for the next 5 years, correct?
Correct. It's a one-time decision, affects the 2014 through 2018 crop years. Now, given that it won't likely happen until early 2015, we're going to know with very good confidence what the 2014 result really looks like before we ultimately have to decide. It'll be something akin to taking the 2014 as a given and really making a choice about 2015 versus 2018, but effectively this runs through the next 4.5 years.
And with corn prices where they are, there's a chance that ARC would pay right now?
If we looked today, ARC would most likely pay for corn and wheat, or excuse me, corn and grain sorghum. It could be close to the money in wheat. It could be still a ways out perhaps, but relevant for soybeans as well. Compare that to price loss coverage. Depending upon your forecast for corn, we're either just above the safety net or dipping into it. Wheat and sorghum are already there. So we're talking about potential help here under either both the revenue plan or the price plan.
The supplemental coverage option that's also available, that decision does need to be made a little bit sooner then.
That is. For wheat producers, supplemental coverage was authorized under this new Farm Bill. Imagine a county level crop insurance policy that stacks on top of your individual plan. Helps to cover some of that deductible portion up to 86% that you might not be covering with buy-up. Supplemental coverage is being rolled out here with the 2015 crop year. That includes wheat, starting here with the fall 2014 plantings. Some counties, not all counties in the state, in fact a small share of counties, but the southern border into western Nebraska, you'll see counties where SCO is available for wheat. That's a decision that happens this September.
More Farm Bill information, including material on ARC and PLC, can be found online at farmbill.unl.edu. That site will be continually updated as more details become available. Matt Cottle of Hartington has been no-tilling for 13 years on his rolling land in Cedar County. Cottle recently told Nebraska Farmers August issue he's now added cover crops to his corn and soybean system. During the drought year of 2012, Cottle left check strips of damaged corn for insurance adjusters. As a result, he wasn't able to get cover crops seeded on those spots. At harvest in 2013, he found a 5 to 6 bushel drop in yield in those strips. The seeding of radishes, turnips, and rye also allows him to graze those fields with cows in fall and winter. You can read more about this soil quality strategy in the August Nebraska Farmer. And now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. During this past week, we've seen the heat build in western Nebraska during the early part of the week, and then that finally moved into eastern Nebraska during the mid and late week period. We also dealt with periodic thunderstorm activity with the most concentrated areas of rainfall situated from north central through south central Nebraska. Fortunately, we had to deal with some significant hail with those thunderstorms, but in the eastern extent and western extent of the state, more scattered like thunderstorm activity, hit and miss. If you got precipitation, you were very lucky, but a lot of areas did not receive the significant moisture that we've seen in the central part of the state. Now, as we go through this next 7-day period, we're going to be dealing with a very strong upper air trough trying to push eastward against that big ridge that brought our warm temperatures. So we do have an extended period with thunderstorm opportunities, and heavy rainfall is likely across portions of Nebraska. So let's take a look at the upper air models. For today, we see that big trough situated across the western United States. Here's that ridge that brought our heat. It's starting to move toward the east. On the back side, we're going to see a southwest flow aloft, and at the surface, moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. So we expect a piece of energy to develop during the afternoon hours coming out of southeastern Colorado, moving toward the northeast. That will generate thunderstorm activity, particularly across the western half of the state. Continue on through the overnight hours and into tomorrow morning, and we will see some of that thunderstorm activity exit out of eastern Nebraska during the AM hours, and then we'll start to redevelop thunderstorm activity as that trough tries to move toward the northeast. Another piece of energy will round out that trough, particularly western Nebraska has the best chance for thunderstorm activity carrying on into eastern Nebraska during the overnight into the early morning hours of Monday. And then that system will exit out and we'll start the process all over again as another piece of energy tries to move into the Pacific Northwest to reinforce its trough. That means another wave of energy will shoot out of the southwest. That will hit mostly western Nebraska, leave most of eastern Nebraska high and dry. As we get into Tuesday, this trough deepens and we'll start to see some cool air coming into the panhandle. Thunderstorm development is likely across the western one-third of the state, and that will carry through the eastern part of the state once again during the overnight into the early morning hours. And as we get into Wednesday, this is when the trough makes its main move. This looks like the best opportunity for widespread thunderstorm activity. I would not be surprised we'll see some severe convection with this system and also some heavy precipitation. Right now it's targeting the central one-third of the state up through northeastern Nebraska, but any shift south or north of that will put that precipitation more in eastern or western Nebraska. Now as we get into Thursday, that system starts to exit out to the Great Lakes. We'll get a cool northwest flow well below normal temperatures are in store both Thursday and also on Friday. We'll start to see some warmth coming into western Nebraska, but the cool air will hang on into eastern Nebraska. So if we look at the temperature forecast, you can see the periodic thunderstorm activity with the best opportunities as we get into the midweek period. Then we'll see a cooling trend all the way through next weekend before we start to see the chance for that continuation of cool air to continue from next Thursday to the following Tuesday as that cool air settles into our region. But we will also have numerous opportunities once again as that front settles in for thunderstorm activity to develop all the way through into the first week of September.
Thanks, Al. Today's information on cattle markets, soybean diseases, range and pasture conditions in the Sandhills, and ARC and PLC programs can be found on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. Next week, Frayne Olson will be our market analyst, and Aaron Berger will discuss marketing this year's calf crop. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.